The first time I heard it, I thought it was the wind. It wasn't the wind. The wind doesn't pause. The wind doesn't wait for you to stop breathing before it makes the next sound. The wind doesn't move closer between gusts, gaining ground in the silence, the way something does when it knows you can't see it through the snow. I was alone in the radar room at Station Kelvin 9, 91 miles north of the last road in Alaska, and there was something standing in the whiteout 400 meters from the window. The thermal display said it was negative 38 degrees outside. The shape on the screen was reading body temperature. 98.6. Standing perfectly still in a storm that didn't have a name, that would never have a name, that the logbook would record as clear skies, light variable winds, nothing to report. I want to tell you what happened out there. I've tried to tell people before. They listen, and they nod, and then they ask me what medication I'm on, and I understand. I do. Because the worst part isn't what I saw. The worst part is that I'm no longer sure I saw it at all. Let me start at the beginning, while I still trust the beginning. I took the contract in October. I'd been out of work for 14 months, and a weather monitoring posting in the Arctic interior paid better than anything a man with my resume had a right to expect. $41,000 for a 6-month rotation. Room and board included. The recruiter was a woman with a flat voice who explained that the isolation was not for everyone, and asked me 3 times if I had any family that would need to reach me in an emergency. I told her no. My mother had passed the year before. There was no one. I remember she paused when I said that. Just for a second. Then she said, "That's good. That makes it simpler." And I told myself she meant the paperwork. The flight in was a single-engine Cessna that fought the crosswinds the entire way. The pilot didn't talk much. When we came down through the cloud layer, I saw the station for the first time, a low cluster of gray buildings half buried in snow, connected by enclosed walkways, with a radar dome on the tallest structure and a forest of antennas bristling against the sky the color of dishwater. No trees. No road. Just white in every direction until the white met the gray and you couldn't tell where the ground ended and the sky began. The pilot helped me unload my 2 duffel bags onto the packed snow. Then he shook my hand, and he looked at me a beat too long, and he said something I didn't understand until much later. He said, "When the radio tells you to log clear skies, you log clear skies." Then he climbed back into the Cessna and left me there. The station manager was a man named Halloran. 60s, maybe? White stubble, eyes the pale washed-out blue of someone who'd been staring at snow for too many winters. He gave me the tour in under 20 minutes. The mess hall. The bunk room, 6 beds, 3 of them occupied. The generator shed. The radar room. The control room, which everyone just called the floor. The supply lockers. The walkways that connected everything so you never have to step outside in a storm. You step outside in a storm, Halloran told me. You stay inside the rope line. We've got guide ropes between every building. You hold the rope, you don't let go. Man let go of the rope here in 09. We found him 40 feet from the door. 40 feet. He let that sit. Whiteout doesn't care which direction you think is right. There were 6 of us at Kelvin 9 that season. Halloran. A radar tech named Pruitt who barely spoke. A heavy-set mechanic called Devon who maintained the generators and the heating plant. A woman named Renata who handled communications and the long-range transmitter. An older man, Eckhart, who'd been coming back to the station for 11 years and had a way of looking at the new arrivals like he was already grieving them. And me. They had me on environmental logging. The bottom of the ladder. My job, as it was explained, was simple. Every 2 hours, around the clock, on a rotating shift, I recorded readings. Temperature. Barometric pressure. Wind speed and direction. Humidity. Cloud cover. Precipitation. I'd read the instruments, write the numbers in the physical logbook, then enter them into the terminal, which relayed them via satellite to a regional office in Fairbanks that I would never see. That was it. Read the numbers. Write the numbers. Send the numbers. 8 times a day, every day, for 6 months. I want you to understand how boring it was at first. I want you to understand that, because it matters. The horror didn't announce itself. It arrived the way frostbite does. You don't feel it taking your fingers until the fingers are already gone. The first week was just cold and routine. I learned the rhythm of the place. The hum of the generators that you stopped hearing after a day and then couldn't sleep without. The fluorescent lights on the floor that buzzed at a frequency just below comfortable, that made everyone's skin look the color of old paper. The way the windows were triple glazed and still grew ferns of ice on the inside by morning. The taste of the reconstituted eggs. The smell of diesel and burnt coffee and the particular staleness of air that's been recycled through the same vents for 40 years. I learned that nobody talked much. At first I thought it was hostility. Later I understood it was conservation. You don't waste words in a place like that. Words are like heat. You learn to keep them in. There was one thing in that first week that I noticed, and then made myself forget. It was my third night. I was on the 0200 logging shift, alone on the floor, and I'd just finished entering the readings. The barometer had been dropping all evening, a front coming in, nothing remarkable. I was filling in the logbook by hand, the way Halloran insisted, when Eckhart came onto the floor in his thermals and his socks, holding a mug of something. He looked at my readings over my shoulder. He looked at the barometer. And he said, very quietly, almost to himself, "It's early this year." I asked him what was early. He looked at me like he'd forgotten I could hear him. And he smiled, not a real smile, just a movement of the mouth, and he said, "Winter. Winter's early." And he took his mug and shuffled back to the bunk room, and I sat there with the pen in my hand, and outside the wind picked up against the glass, and I wrote down light snow, winds 15 knots NNW, and I did not think about it again for a long time. I should have thought about it. The thing about a logbook is that it remembers more than you do. It was the end of my third week when I first noticed the gap. I'd been told to cross-reference the physical log against the digital archive, a routine audit, Halloran said, to make sure the satellite uplink hadn't dropped any entries. So I sat at the terminal, the heavy paper logbook open beside me, and I went line by line, day by day, my reading against the record. And there was a night missing. Not from the physical log. The physical log had it, November 4th, the 2,000 hours entry, in handwriting I didn't recognize. Severe winter storm. Visibility 0. Winds gusting 60+ knots. Barometric pressure 28.41 and falling. Temperature -44. Below that, a second line, same hand, event ongoing. Do not transmit. But in the digital archive, the one that went to Fairbanks, November 4th at 2,000 hours read clear. Winds light and variable. Visibility unlimited. No precipitation. Temperature -19. 2 records. Same station. Same hour. Completely different worlds. I sat there for a long time looking at it. My first instinct was that someone had made a mistake. A transcription error, a fat-fingered entry. But the numbers were too different. You don't accidentally turn a 60-knot storm into a clear night. And the handwritten note, "Do not transmit," that wasn't a mistake. That was an instruction. I asked Renata about it the next morning. She was the communications operator. If anything got sent or didn't get sent, she'd know. I found her in the radio room with her headphones around her neck, drinking coffee and staring at the long-range set. I told her I'd found a discrepancy in the November 4th logs. I asked if she remembered a storm that night. She didn't look up from the radio. She said, "We don't log every weather event." I said this wasn't a small event. 60-knot winds. 0 visibility. I asked why it would be recorded as clear. And she turned and looked at me, and her face was doing something complicated, something I now recognize as fear trying to pass itself off as patience, and she said, "Some storms aren't ours to report. You'll learn the difference." I asked her what that meant. The difference between what? She put her headphones back on. "Talk to Halloran if you've got questions about procedure." And that was the end of it. But I didn't talk to Halloran. Something stopped me. Some animal instinct that recognized I'd touched a wire I wasn't supposed to touch, and that the smart thing was to pretend I hadn't felt the shock. So instead, I started watching. I noticed things I'd been too new to notice before. I noticed that there were 2 logbooks. The one I wrote in, and another one, kept in a locked drawer in Halloran's office, that the senior staff wrote in during certain storms. I never saw inside it. I just saw them write in it, Halloran, Eckhart, sometimes Pruitt, and then lock the drawer, and the timing always lined up with the worst weather. I noticed that the storms that went in the other book had a sound to them. I can't explain it better than that. A normal Arctic storm is chaos, wind from every direction, snow like static, the building groaning. But these other storms, the ones that didn't get reported, they were organized. The wind would come from one direction and hold steady, like breathing. And underneath the wind there was a low frequency, almost too low to hear, that you felt in your back teeth and the long bones of your arms more than you heard it with your ears. I noticed that during those storms, everyone changed. There was a routine. I didn't understand it at first. When the barometer dropped past a certain point, past 28.50, I eventually worked out, and the wind locked into that steady direction, the senior staff would move through the station performing what I can only call a ritual, though they'd have hated that word. They'd have called it procedure. Every exterior door got bolted. Not locked, bolted, with a steel bar that dropped into brackets, the kind of thing you'd put on a bank vault. Every window got covered with an insulated steel shutter from the inside. The lights on the floor got dimmed to emergency red. And the radio, the long-range transmitter, got switched off entirely. Renata would shut it down and pull a breaker, physically disconnecting it, and she would not turn it back on until the storm passed. And then everyone would sit in the mess hall, usually, with the red light and the bolted doors, and they would wait. Not talking. Not playing cards. Just waiting, with the expressions of people in a fallout shelter listening to something pass overhead. The first time I went through it, I asked Devin, the mechanic, the most human of them, what we were doing. He said, "Sitting out a bad one." I said the doors were bolted from the inside. I said you don't bolt doors against weather. And Devin looked at the red light on the ceiling, and he was quiet for a while, and then he said something I've never been able to forget. He said, "You bolt the door against weather when the weather knows where the door is." Then he closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall, and he didn't say anything else for 2 hours, until the wind dropped and the barometer came back up and Halloran went around unbolting everything and Renata reconnected the breaker, and life went back to its boring, freezing normal as though none of it had happened. That night I went back to my bunk and I noticed something was wrong with my memory. I tried to reconstruct the evening, and there was a piece missing. Not a vague piece, a clean, surgical absence. I remembered the barometer dropping. I remembered the bolting of the doors. I remembered sitting down in the mess hall under the red light. And then I remembered Halloran unbolting the door, and the clock on the wall said it was 4 hours later than the last thing I clearly remembered. 4 hours. Gone. Not foggy. Gone, the way the scent records were gone, replaced with something blank and clean and official. I told myself I'd fallen asleep. People fall asleep. That's all it was. But I'd had 4 cups of coffee. And when I checked my hands the next morning, the pads of my fingers were raw and cracked, the way they get from cold, from being outside, and I had not been outside. The doors had been bolted. I'd watched them get bolted. There was no way I'd been outside. I started keeping my own log after that. A private one, in a notebook I kept inside my jacket against my chest. I wrote down everything. The dates. The pressure readings. The missing hours. What people said. I did it because I no longer trusted the station's memory, and I was beginning to suspect I couldn't fully trust my own, and a man who can't trust his memory has to write everything down or he'll lose the thread of his own life. I still have that notebook. It's the only reason I can tell you any of this. Because when I read back over it now, there are entries in my handwriting that I do not remember writing. And they describe things that I do not remember happening. And the worst one, dated November 19th, says only this. It came up to the window again. I let it. I don't know why I let it. I have to stop letting it. I have read that sentence 500 times. I do not remember writing it. I do not remember a window. The windows were shuttered. I do not know what I let in. In early December the storm came that should not have existed. I knew it was coming before the instruments did. We all did. There's a particular stillness that settles over that landscape before one of the unreported storms. The air goes dead flat, the generators seem louder, and the snow stops moving entirely, so that the whole world holds its breath. The animals, what few there are out there, vanish. We had a fox that scavenged around the supply locker most weeks. 3 days before the December storm, it stopped coming, and we never saw it again. The barometric pressure began to fall on the morning of December 9th, and it did not stop falling. I want to be clear about this part, because this is where the people who hear my story usually stop believing me. Normal atmospheric pressure at sea level is about 29.92 inches of mercury. A severe storm, a real monster of a system, might pull it down to 27 or so. The lowest pressure ever recorded on Earth, inside a super typhoon, was around 25.69. Our barometer that day dropped to 24.10. And then the needle went past the bottom of the dial, and I had to switch to the digital sensor to read it at all, and the digital sensor showed it still falling. 23.8, 23.5, 23.1. I took the reading to Halloran. I found him in his office with the locked drawer open and the second logbook in front of him, and Eckhart standing beside him, and the two of them looked at my number, and they looked at each other, and Halloran said, "That's not possible," in a tone that meant he knew exactly how possible it was. Eckhart said, "It's the biggest one I've seen." Halloran said, "We've never logged below 26. And Eckhart said, and I remember this exactly, because of what came after, Eckhart said, "We've never survived below 26. They sent me out of the office. Through the door I heard Halloran on the internal phone to Devon, telling him to bring the generators to full and to seal the fuel line, and to Renata, telling her to pull the breaker on the transmitter now, not when the storm hit, now. The bolting began 2 hours early that day. And this time it was different. This time Pruitt, the silent radar tech, went around the interior of the station with a roll of something, a heavy gray tape, almost like lead foil, and he taped over every seam. Every door frame, every window edge, every vent. He worked methodically, and his hands were shaking, and when I tried to help him he flinched away from me so hard he dropped the roll. He said, "Don't touch the seals. Once they're set, don't touch them." His voice was thin. "It finds the gaps. It comes in through the gaps." I asked him what does. What comes in? And Pruitt, who I had heard say maybe 40 words in 5 weeks, Pruitt looked at me with eyes that were wet and bright and absolutely certain, and he said, "You've already met it. You just don't remember. None of us remember the same things. That's how you know it's been in your head." Then he picked up his tape and went back to sealing the seams. The storm hit at 1840 hours. I have lived through Arctic storms. I know what a real one sounds like. The wind like a freight train that never arrives, the building shuddering, the deep cold pressing against the walls. This was not that. This was worse for being quieter. The wind, when it came from a single direction and held there, exactly as I'd noticed before, but stronger, a vast, steady, exhaling pressure, like standing in the throat of something enormous and patient. And under it, the low frequency, the one I felt in my teeth, but this time loud enough that the coffee in my mug rippled with it, concentric rings spreading out from the center, over and over, in time with the breathing of the wind. The lights went to red. We sat in the mess hall. All 6 of us, for once, in the same room, under the red light, with the gray tape sealing us in. And the temperature inside the station began to drop. This is the part. This is the part one needs you to sit with. The generators were at full. The heating plant was running. Devon had checked the fuel line himself. And the temperature inside the sealed, heated, fully powered station fell from a comfortable 68 degrees to 50, to 40, to 30, to below freezing, while every instrument said the heating system was working perfectly. We watched our breaths start to show under the red light. Eckhart began to pray. Quietly, under his breath, not any prayer I recognized. Renata had her eyes shut and her hands pressed flat against the table, like she was bracing for an impact that wasn't coming from any direction you could point to. Devin was crying without making a sound, the tears freezing on his face. And Halloran sat at the head of the table with the second logbook open in front of him and a pen in his hand, writing continuously, his eyes on the door, recording something, and I leaned over to see what he was writing, and the page was covered edge to edge in a single repeated phrase, hundreds of times, in handwriting that got worse as it went. It is outside. It is outside. It is outside. It is outside. And then the knocking started. It came from the main door. Slow. Patient. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. The polite, human rhythm of someone who has come a long way and would like to be let in. Nobody moved. The knocking came again. And then a voice. And this is the thing I can't make anyone understand. The voice was mine. It was my own voice, on the other side of the bolted, sealed, taped door, in the middle of a storm that had no name and pressure that could not exist, and it was calling my name, and it sounded cold, and it sounded tired, and it said, "Let me in. It's so cold out here. Please. It's me. Let me in." I stood up. I don't remember deciding to stand up. I remember being on my feet, and walking toward the door, and the voice getting warmer and more grateful as I approached. Yes, that's it, just the bolt, just lift the bolt. And then Halloran's hand was on my chest, and his face was an inch from mine, and he was saying, very low and very steady, "It is not you. There is no you out there. You are in here. Look at me. You are in here." And I looked at him, and I understood that he had done this before. Many times. That this was procedure 2, the part where one of them tries to open the door, and the others have to stop them, and they take turns, season after season, year after year, being the one who hears their own voice in the storm. I sat back down. My hands were raw and cracked again. I don't know how. They had been fine an hour before. The storm lasted 9 hours. The knocking stopped around hour 3. The cold lifted around hour 6, the temperature inside climbing back to normal as though it had never dropped, the instruments still cheerfully insisting nothing had ever been wrong. By hour 9 the wind released its single-held breath and scattered into ordinary chaos, ordinary weather, a normal storm dying out the way normal storms do. Halloran went around unbolting the doors at dawn. I logged the official reading for that morning. I wrote it myself, in the book that goes to Fairbanks. I wrote, overcast. Winds light variable. Temperature -21. No significant precipitation. Nothing to report. I wrote it in my own hand, and as I wrote it, I understood the pilot's words from my first day, and I understood Renata's, and I understood why the records lied. It wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't a cover-up in the way I'd imagined. It was simpler and worse than that. You can't report a thing you have no language for. You can't put a number on the temperature of fear, or a wind direction on a voice that wears your own face. The official log only has room for the world as it's supposed to be. Everything else goes in the locked drawer, in the handwriting that gets worse as the night goes on, and then it goes nowhere at all. The storms aren't being hidden from the world. The world is being hidden from the storms. The records are the camouflage. As long as Kelvin 9 keeps sending Fairbanks its clear skies and its light variable winds, the station stays exactly what it appears to be on every map and every manifest. An unremarkable weather post, too boring to think about, too small to matter. A thing you'd never look at twice. A thing that doesn't know the door is there. I found the older records in January. I shouldn't have been looking. I knew by then that looking was the thing that got into your head, that curiosity was the gap in the seal, the place where it came in. But I'd lost too much time by then. My private notebook had entries I couldn't account for. I'd found frost on the inside of my own bunkroom window one morning, a clear handprint melted into it from the inside, and the print was small, far too small, the hand of a child, and I do not have children, and there are no children at Kelvin 9, and there is no child within 91 miles of that place. I had to understand. So I broke into the records. The station kept its archives in a sublevel below the generator shed, a concrete room, cold as a meat locker, full of filing cabinets that went back to the station's construction in 1961. I got in during a quiet stretch when Halloran was sleeping and Devon was running maintenance, and the others were on the floor. The official records were all there, decade after decade of clear skies and light variable winds. But behind them, in the back cabinets, were the other books. The locked drawer books, retired and filed away. Dozens of them. Going back 60 years. I read until my hands were too cold to turn the pages. I'm not going to tell you everything I read, because some of it I don't believe even now, and some of it I believe too much. But I'll tell you the shape of it. The station was never built to monitor the weather. The weather monitoring is real, the readings are real, the reports to Fairbanks are real, but it's the cover, the camouflage, the boring gray paint over something the records only ever refer to obliquely, never directly, as though the men who wrote them were afraid that writing the true name down would be the same as saying it aloud, and that saying it aloud would be the same as opening the door. The closest any of them came was in an entry from 1978, by a station manager named Voss, who I gathered did not survive his rotation. He wrote, "It does not come with the storms. It is the storms, or the storms are how it moves, the way a current moves through water. It has been crossing this part of the north for longer than the instruments, longer than the maps, longer than the people who made the maps. The old hunters knew the routes and stayed off them. We built the station on one of the routes. I do not know if that was ignorance or invitation. It is not hostile in the way an animal is hostile. It is hungry in the way the cold is hungry, without malice, without mercy, simply taking what it touches. It learns the shape of what it has taken. That is why it speaks in our voices. Those are not tricks. Those are the voices of everyone it has already taken, here and elsewhere, calling out from inside it. When you hear yourself at the door, you are hearing your own future. It is showing you what it will sound like when you are part of it. The seals work. The dark works. The silence works. It navigates by attention, it finds what notices it. So we do not notice it. We log clear skies. We bolt the doors and we sit in the dark and we feel nothing and we think nothing and we wait, and it passes over us the way it passes over a stone, because we have made ourselves into stones. The ones who don't make it are the ones who can't stop being people for the length of a storm. The ones who hope. The ones who answer. I sat in that cold concrete room and I understood why the senior staff were the way they were. Why they didn't talk. Why they conserved their words and their feelings like heat. Eckhart, 11 years of this. Halloran, longer. They weren't cold men by nature. They had made themselves cold the way Voss described. They had learned to be stones, because being a person in that place, during those storms, was fatal. The detachment I'd mistaken for hostility in my first week was a survival adaptation. They had each, slowly, year by year, turned off the parts of themselves that the thing could find. And it was costing them everything. You could see it. Renata flinched at her own reflection. Pruitt couldn't remember which of his memories were real. Eckhart prayed to something that wasn't God. Devon cried silently during the storms because crying was the only feeling he had left, and even that was leaking out of him. They were not crazy. That's the thing I most need you to understand. They were the sanest people I have ever known. They had simply seen something that the human mind isn't built to file, and they had survived it the only way it could be survived, by becoming a little less human each time, by sanding themselves down until there was nothing left for it to grip. I went back up the stairs that night a different person than I'd gone down. Because I understood, finally, the thing the records were really protecting. It wasn't the world's ignorance. It was ours. The not knowing was the armor. The men who'd written those books had given me a gift by leaving the true name out, by refusing to draw the thing, by keeping it in the gaps and the silences, because the moment you fully see it, the moment you fully know it, you've noticed it, and once you've noticed it, it can find you anywhere. Even 91 miles from the last road. Even in your sleep. Even in a sealed room with the lights turned off, sitting very still, trying with everything you have to be a stone. I finished my rotation in April. I'm told I finished it. There's a flight manifest with my name on it, and a deposit in my account for $41,000, and a discharge form I apparently signed. I remember almost none of it. The last clear memory I have of Kelvin 9 is from late February. After that, my private notebook keeps going, pages and pages, my handwriting, daily entries, but I read them the way you'd read a stranger's diary. They describe storms I don't remember. Procedures I don't remember learning. Conversations with Eckhart, with Halloran, that left no trace in me at all. The last entry before the writing stops is dated March 30th. It says, Halloran says I'm ready to go home. He says I've learned to be quiet enough. He says the trick is to keep being quiet after you leave. Don't tell anyone. Don't write it down. Don't think about it before you sleep. It can't cross the water, he says, but it remembers the ones who noticed it, and if you start noticing again, it knows how to reach. Through dreams. Through cold. Through your own voice in an empty room. I asked him what happens if I forget the procedure. If I slip. He didn't answer. He just gave me Vasa's last book to take with me. He said someone has to keep the record, and the record can't stay at the station, because someday the station will be gone and the thing will still be moving, still crossing the north, still looking for the ones who hope. He said, you were chosen for this job because you had no one. No family to ask questions. No one to notice if you changed. He said that's the only kind of person who can do this work. The kind no one is watching. The kind that can disappear into the gray. He said, I'm sorry. We all were that kind once. That's why we're here. That's the last entry. I live in Oregon now. A small apartment, ground floor, near the coast, because Halloran was right about the water. It's quieter near the water, the dreams are less frequent. I keep the heat turned up high. I sleep with the lights on. I do not own a barometer, and when the pressure drops before a storm I feel it in my back teeth and the long bones of my arms, and I get into bed and I turn off every feeling I have and I try, with everything I have left, to be a stone. Most nights it works. I still have Vasa's book. And my own notebook. And I'm reading them, and I'm telling you all this, and I know, that telling you is the wrong thing to do. That telling you is noticing. That noticing is the gap in the seal. But here's what they didn't put in any of the records. Here's the thing I figured out on my own, in this apartment, near the water, with the lights on. 3 nights ago the pressure dropped. A storm came in off the Pacific, an ordinary storm, the kind that has a name, and gets reported and shows up on every weather map in the state. And I lay in my bed and I made myself into a stone, the way I was taught. And at 3 a.m. there was a knock at my door. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 knocks. And a voice on the other side. Cold, and tired, and grateful that I was finally home. It was my voice. It said, "Let me in. It's so cold out here. It's me. It's been so long. Let me in." I did not answer. I did not move. I lay in the warm, bright room and I turned myself to stone and I waited, and after a while the knocking stopped, and the storm passed, and in the morning there was no snow because it never snows here, and no footprints because the ground was dry, and nothing to report. Nothing to report. But I know what I heard. And I know it crossed the water, even though Halloran said it couldn't, because I noticed it, all those nights at the station, I noticed it, and it noticed me back, and now it has my voice, and it knows my name, and it has learned the shape of the man it's going to take. So I'm telling you this for one reason. Not as a warning. Warnings don't help. You can't unnotice a thing once you've heard about it, and I'm sorry, I'm genuinely sorry, because by listening this long you've started to notice it too. I'm telling you because the records have to be kept. And the record can't stay with me, because someday I'll be gone, and the thing will still be moving, still crossing the north and now, apparently, the water too, still looking for the ones who hope. Someone has to hold the book after me. Someone no one is watching. Someone who can disappear into the gray. I think you understand why I needed you to hear the whole thing. If the pressure drops some night, and the cold gets into your room no matter how high you turn the heat, and there's a knock at your door, 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. And the voice on the other side is yours. Don't answer. Turn off every light inside you. Be a stone. And whatever you do, whatever it says, whatever it sounds like, don't let it in.